Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. As always, thank you a million times over for taking time to be here with me today. I know there's a lot of places you could be. Well, maybe not physically be, right? Because everyone's housebound right now. This is being recorded in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I know that you can't be out there doing a lot of things, but I know there's a lot of other things you could be focusing on. And the fact that your ears are on this is just massively appreciated. And I hope you reap a lot of value from today's episode. For those of you who are regular listeners of the show, I have to say that, it's been a while since I have actually sat down and recorded a new episode. And the reason that's true is because the last episode I recorded was in early March. I had kind of pre-recorded my March episodes because I was going out of town with my family. And then, world events took a dramatic shift. And here we are a month later living in a very different reality. So while I have not produced an episode specifically speaking to the COVID-19 pandemic, I have been very active in my communities, in the Women of Grace and Grit Facebook community, which is a free community. I've been going live every single morning at 8 o'clock in that group to provide a little additional support. And I am fiercely committed to producing an episode every week through the month of April, and potentially even beyond, so I can provide you with a little additional support through this event, meaning the event of this pandemic. Because I know that a lot of people are wrestling with just reorganizing their lives and really coping with a lot of uncomfortable emotions, the emotion of fear with all the uncertainty that's in the world. There's a lot of disappointment, a lot of frustration. And while I can't remedy that for you directly, I certainly can provide you with a lot of tools and a lot of perspective shifting to hopefully help you get through it with more grace and ease. So I am committed to doing that over the course of the next month and perhaps even beyond, depending how long this lasts. So this is really interesting timing. Today, we're celebrating the 200th episode of the Grace and Grit podcast. And it's the first episode that I've done directly speaking to the pandemic. So those two topics very much feel at odds with each other. I'm celebrating and I'm trying to speak into the hardship of this current reality. So I'm going to do both. And the way that I'm going to do both is I have titled this episode Resiliency Road. I love the topic of resiliency. I asked my community, my sort of Facebook communities and my online communities a while back, what they wanted me to speak into for the 200th episode. And the word resiliency came up more than once, which I love because resiliency is such an awesome word. It's such an awesome quality. Although obviously we were nowhere near the current state of affairs when I initially asked that question, I really think that we need to be reminded collectively of our capacity for resilience now more than ever. So that is precisely what I want to speak into today. And I am going to simultaneously celebrate this 200th episode and what it took to get here, and hopefully give you some nuggets of wisdom and inspiration to help you bolster your own resiliency. Now, the other thing I want to prepare you for in this episode today is, as part of the celebratory side of this conversation, I asked people to share with me voice memos So I had a website that we set up where people could go and leave a little voice message for me about how the Grace and Grit podcast has impacted their life. And so I'm going to play some of those messages throughout this episode today, because I think it's a fun way to celebrate, for you to hear from people other than just me. And it also just feels more like a celebration that more of us are involved. It's not just you listening to me, but it's a lot of us speaking. So we are going to pepper this episode today with those voice memos and also speak directly to resiliency. So let's begin, shall we?
Hi, my name is Summer, and I've been a personal client and a podcast listener for years. Grace and Grit has transformed the way that I view health and wellness forever. I am so deeply grateful for Courtney and the work that she is doing. I can't quite put into words how much this podcast and having her as a mentor has helped me over the past few years. In fact, I quote her so frequently that all of my friends and family who wouldn't otherwise know anything about Grace and Grit also feel like they know Courtney. So, Courtney, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your mentorship, and your devotion to women's health. You are impacting so many lives, including mine and my daughter's, with truth and buckets of grace. So cheers to you, my mentor and friend, for 200 episodes of awesome. I hope that you have 200 more.
So like I said, we're celebrating the 200th episode of the Grace and Grit podcast. This has been 4 years in the making, hundreds of hours of time, not just by me, but with my team of support. I have an incredible audio engineer who's worked on this show for the entirety of the show for all 4 years. I have an amazing VA VA is a virtual assistant who I've been with for now, I think almost 5 years, who has been very supportive in my ability to produce a podcast each week. I have made a tremendous amount of mistakes. There has been a lot of frustration and a lot of moments of self-doubt. And yet here we are. And why are we here? How did we make it this far? I really credit that to resiliency. I credit it to the things that helped me to develop resiliency. Am I this resilient in every aspect of my life? Nope, I'm not. I'm the first to admit that. But I do believe that fiercely committing to this project and going all in for the past 4 years to make it to 200 episodes and want to continue to go well beyond 200 episodes is really testimony to what the journey has taught me, and also testimony to the fact that absolutely I have become a more resilient human in the process of committing to this endeavor. And I'll be honest, I had no idea what I was doing when I started this podcast. Many of you have heard this story before, but the whole reason the Grace and Grit podcast began was because I was getting really frustrated with the amount of time it was taking me to sit down and write an article. I wanted to offer free content to my community, but writing was taking me a lot of time. I love writing, but it is a very time-consuming activity for me. And I've been teaching for years, and a lot of people were suggesting to me that I start a podcast. So I started looking into it, and I didn't know much. I had no idea how to begin. I didn't own a microphone. I had no clue how to even apply to iTunes, to have a podcast on iTunes. But I started asking questions, and I started kind of collecting resources. I started investing in my education, specifically around podcasting. And I started to build a support team. And I jumped long before I saw the whole path. And honestly, I think that's the brilliance of nature. We're not supposed to see the whole path when we commit to something new. Because if we did, we would be terrified. We would never even take the first step because we'd be so stinking overwhelmed by what it was going to take from us, right? In terms of time, energy, money, all of the, unforeseen challenges. If we knew all of that in advance, we would be paralyzed to take action. Now, on the flip side of that, a lot of us are paralyzed to take action because we overthink things from the outset. right? We think that we're supposed to see the whole staircase before we take the first step, and therefore we never begin. But I'm telling you this because I want you to remind yourself that whatever you're leaning into, whatever risk you are taking in your life, whatever hardship you are confronting right now, you're not supposed to see how it's all going to work out. It's actually a really beautiful thing that you don't know how it's all going to work out. In several months, several years down the line, when you look back, you are going to better understand why you didn't know everything from the outset.
I want to congratulate Courtney for her 200th episode of a podcast that impacts women's lives to the deep core. I am grateful to be one of them. I need to be honest. I first was attracted to her podcast due to the title. I knew that I had a lot of grit, yet I wanted more grace. I thought there must be some secrets for balancing the two. Courtney's monthly themes and workshops have helped me reveal exactly the type of balance that I want for my personal health. It's a combination of inner serenity and physical resiliency while maintaining the basic pillars of health. Sounds great in theory. Now what do I do with that vision? Prioritize, organize, and don't forget to celebrate my wins. I learn something valuable each and every time I listen to her podcast or participate in a workshop and in her online communities. Even when I do not think the topic will relate to my life specifically, there's always a relevant piece of wisdom that I take away, and I'm so glad that I tuned in with an open mind. She has helped me prioritize my goals and stay on track. Her work is like none that I've ever experienced before. And I love setting wellness goals and learning about how to achieve them. Beyond defining what I want in my life and why, Courtney helps break down my weak spot, which is self-sabotage. I know what to do, so why do I allow my lizard brain to take over at 5 p.m.? After a lot of consistent practice, my awareness has heightened so I can more quickly realign my thoughts and actions to support my vision of good health and well-being. Thank you, Courtney, for your honesty, compassion, professionalism, commitment, curiosity, and desire to help so many women in their health journey. You are an extraordinary leader, and I'm a better person because of it. Sincerely, Celestine Arambulo.
So let's talk about the definition of resilience. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines resilience as an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. So once again, resiliency is the ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. So I think we can all agree that resilience is a very relevant topic right now because we're going through a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty. Now, some people will perceive it as misfortune. Some people will perceive it differently. But there is no denying life is less predictable. Life is a little scary right now because our health is at risk. And so I think this is the perfect time to be reminded of our capacity to develop more resilience. Now, in my research for this podcast, I always do, some research before I record these episodes. And I read several articles and I perused my bookshelf and a couple other definitions that I want to share with you about resiliency. One is from Psychology Today, which is an online publication. And then the other one that I want to share with you is from the Mayo Clinic. So I'll read you the one from Psychology Today first. Psychology Today defines resilience as this. Adversity is a fact of life. Resilience is that ineffable quality that allows some people to be knocked down by life and come back at least as strong as before. Rather than letting difficulties or failures overcome them and drain their resolve, they find a way to rise. Psychologists have identified some of the factors that make a person resilient, such as a positive attitude, optimism, the ability to regulate emotions, and the ability to see failure as a form of helpful feedback. Research shows that optimism helps blunt the impact of stress on the mind and body in the wake of disturbing experiences. And that gives people access to their own cognitive resources, enabling cool-headed analysis of what might have gone wrong and consideration of behavioral paths that might be more productive. Resilience is not some magical quality. It takes real mental work to transcend hardship. But even after misfortune, resilient people are able to change course and move towards achieving their goals. There's growing evidence that the elements of resilience can be cultivated. So what I really want you to hear in that is that resilience is a learned behavior. It is something that we can start practicing at any time. And it's not easy, which is why a lot of people never spend time cultivating it. Developing your resilience requires that you lean into hardship, that you look for ways to transcend hardship. And hardship requires a willingness to get really uncomfortable. And holy cow, as humans, do we not like discomfort? And I always refer to our lizard brain, right? A lot of you hear me talk about the lizard brain. The lizard brain loves to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and exert the least amount of effort. And so when you're presented with an uncomfortable situation, your reaction is usually to run from it. But then you have this brilliant prefrontal cortex that can remind you that we become stronger by doing hard things. We become more resilient by doing hard things. Your growth, your evolution is in doing hard things. It depends on you doing hard things.
I started listening to the Grace and Grit podcast about 14 months ago. I started working with Courtney. I came to her to have some help with weight loss. And what I gained from Courtney was an understanding and a practice of mindset management and shifting my thinking about how I was seeing things. Instead of holding myself small and not living my full life because of extra weight, I started living my life and engaging and shifting how I see myself and how I see myself in the world and what is possible. And because of that, I have gained so much. I've gained a life that I absolutely love living in. And through that, I've lost some weight. So Courtney, thank you so much. Thank you for giving me a new lease on my life. Congratulations on your successful podcast. And I'm just so blessed by you. Thank you.
The second definition that I want to read you is from the Mayo Clinic. The Mayo Clinic says this: when you have resilience, you harness inner strength that helps you rebound from a setback or a challenge, such as a job loss, an illness, a disaster, or the death of a loved one. If you lack resilience, you might dwell on problems, feel victimized, become easily overwhelmed, or turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms, such as substance abuse. Resilience won't make your problems go away, but resilience can give you the ability to see past them, find enjoyment in life, and better handle stress. If you aren't as resilient as you'd like to be, you can develop skills to become more resilient. Resilience is the ability to roll with the punches. When stress, adversity, or trauma strikes, you still experience anger and grief and pain, but you're able to keep functioning, both physically and psychologically. However, resilience is not about toughing it out, being stoic, or going it alone. In fact, being able to reach out to others for support is a key component of being resilient. So once again, I love that this excerpt from Mayo Clinic's website emphasizes that resilience can be learned. And resilience is not just about toughing it out. It's about asking for support and feeling your emotions, right? And I've been talking about this for 2 weeks now inside of my Facebook community, that a big part of resilience is allowing all the emotions to the table, letting yourself feel them, but not letting them shut you down.
Hi, Courtney. Congratulations on producing 200 life-changing episodes. There really aren't any words to truly express how much the Grace and Grit podcast means to me and how pivotal the podcast has been in my journey toward resiliency. I began listening in 2017 after moving to Colorado 7 months pregnant. My initial goal in listening was to clear fears about having an unmedicated birth. Not only did I birth without fear, I actually enjoyed the experience. It was so empowering that I felt called to a career as a doula and focused my personal training practice on the pre- and postnatal population. I again turned to the podcast to fuel my resiliency in starting a business during early motherhood. When my mom passed away last year, when I was 4 months pregnant with a toddler and a deployed spouse, I knew where to turn to inspire the resiliency required to keep my baby and I safe and healthy. I was able to take the most difficult time of my life and turn it into a cathartic journey. I joined the Consistency Code and am now a member of the Rumble and Rise community. I have come to believe that hardship is the greatest opportunity for growth and the perfect time to define what is most important in the present phase of life. I am so thankful that I am pursuing resiliency with grace and grit.
In my opinion, again, and my opinion is shaped from years of working with women around resiliency. Their resiliency to do hard things, to move through challenges, to face hard things. So in my experience, resiliency is really kind of made up of 4 components. There's 4 primary ingredients, if you will, to resiliency. And those 4 ingredients are commitment, courage, consistency, and confidence. So I want to speak a little bit into each one of those right now. So let's start with commitment. You need to commit to bolster your resilience. You know, a lot of people say they're committed, but when things get difficult, it becomes very apparent that they were only willing to try things on until they got uncomfortable. And then they're out. We see this in relationships. We see this with trying to improve health. We see this with people trying to take, new risks in their life. That they say they're committed, but the second things get hard or something happens that is unexpected, they use it as rationalization to quit, to move on to something else. So when I say that you need to commit to bolster your resilience, I'm specifically speaking to committing to figuring things out, right? We need to commit to showing up even when we don't want to. And there's going to be a lot of moments that you don't want to. I mean, how easy right now would it be just to not, just to stay in bed all day, to pull the covers back over our head and just wait until this is all over? I can't tell you how easy it would have been to not produce 200 episodes of this podcast. There were a lot of days I didn't want to show up for so many reasons. But I did because I knew I was fully committed. Committing to bolster your resilience also means that we commit to maintaining a strong opinion of ourselves when things don't go the way we planned them to. Meaning when you make mistakes, when you fail, when your expectations aren't being met, you commit to not making that mean something about you. There was a lot of mistakes and a lot of mishaps in the past 4 years. And yet, I didn't make it mean anything about me. I just made it mean that there was something wrong with my strategy. I needed a better plan. I need to rework the way I was approaching things. So it actually made me better because I wasn't letting it define who I was as a person. Commitment is also, a big part of commitment is committing to putting one foot in front of the other without knowing how it's all going to work out. And I already spoke to this, so I'm not going to go too deeply into it again. But just know all you need to know right now is the next right step. You don't need to know how this is all going to play out. You need to know what the next right step is based on the information you currently have. And once you take that step, the next right step will reveal itself. And then the next, and then the next, and then the next. That's how it works. But if you keep telling yourself you have to see it all, you have to see the whole picture of how it's going to turn out before you can take the next step, you'll just stay paralyzed. So things that help me to commit are, number one, remembering that I get to decide the meaning that I put on my life. I get to decide what I pursue. I get to decide what I make things mean. And isn't that awesome? When I am wrestling with difficult emotion, let's just talk about like producing 200 episodes of this podcast. There was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of self-doubt. There was a lot of days I just didn't feel like showing up to do the work it would take to produce another episode. But in those moments, I reminded myself why I was willing to get uncomfortable. I reminded myself why I was willing to fail and screw up, why I was willing to do it imperfectly. I reminded myself why I was willing to ask for help if I needed it. And I needed a lot of it. Not only did I need help from my team, I needed a lot of help from my friends and family just to remind me that I could do it. So I had a few pity parties, for sure. And I reached out, and I have some great friends that allow me to have about a 5-minute, 10-minute pity party. And then they basically pick me up off the floor, right? They help me to get up off the floor and remind me why I started in the first place and all the good things that this is doing in the world. Friends and family are awesome at that. And if you don't have those friends or you don't have that family, you need to find some new friends because those people exist and you need them in your life.
Hi, Courtney. It's Jackie from Fortify. I just want to say congratulations on 200 episodes. You have changed the lives of so many women with your amazing takeaways and incredible guests and all of the advice that we can incorporate into our lives today and every day. Congratulations and thank you so much for all the work that you do on the Grace and Grit podcast.
Now, when I talk about commitment with my students, I often use the analogy of learning how to swim. That if you want to learn how to swim, you can't just get your toe wet. You can't just get your foot wet. You can't just get your knee, wet up to your knees or your waist. You got to be all in, fully submerged. And I think a lot of people aren't really committed to figuring things out. They just want to have one toe dipped in the pool. And if you really want to test the level of your commitment to figuring things out, to moving your life forward, bring in something challenging. Stand in the arena with hardship, because those are the moments where you really get to see the depth of your commitment. I mean, when things are going well, it's so easy to commit. I mean, think about it. When you first got together with your partner, so easy to commit, right? For a lot of us, because it felt good. We were so excited. Everything was new. Everything seemed perfect. And then several years of that relationship down the road, maybe a couple kids later, a couple careers, a lot of, financial problems with in-laws, you layer it all on. And we really get to see the level of our commitment. And that's true of anything in life. That's true of life itself. How committed are you to making the most out of your life, regardless of the hardships that are thrown in your pathway? I recently saw a quote by Agatha Christie on Facebook that I loved. It said, "I like living. I've sometimes been wildly, despairingly, acutely miserable, racked with sorrow. But through it all, I still know quite certainly that just to be alive is a grand thing." And that quote, it just reeks of resiliency, right? That even though she had despair and at times was acutely miserable and racked with sorrow, in those moments, she also simultaneously recognized what a grand thing it is to be alive. And isn't that life, right? There's always this duality of the reality of the hardship that is currently present, whatever that may be for you. It's interesting that we're all experiencing a collective hardship right now. And simultaneously, we're being reminded of how incredible life is and how precious life is. Now, as much as I think it's important to feel all of the emotion that shows up from both of those thoughts and both of those perspectives, the one that grows is the one that you feed, right? The one that you choose to focus on. And through 200 episodes of this podcast, holy cow, could I have easily focused on so many things that would have caused me to quit. It was very time consuming. It was very expensive. I didn't necessarily think that I was getting the number of downloads that I thought I should be getting. So there's so many things I could have chosen to focus on and used as rationalization for just not pursuing, not continuing on. But I didn't. I chose to focus on all the wonderful things that were happening simultaneous to all that difficulty. That I knew I was helping people because I was hearing it in client conversations. I was talking to people that I didn't even know were listening to the podcast until we were in conversation and they just happened to mention it. I was getting more clear on my message. I was growing as a human because, good Lord, the number of skill sets I had to learn in order to make this possible, it grew me as a human. So I chose to focus on those things. And that's what enabled me to keep showing up.
The Grace and Grit podcast is truly life-changing. Courtney has an approach unlike really anybody else. She's really passionate about wellness in her life and in yours too. And I think that her passion for loving your life is truly contagious. You can't help but feel more aligned after just listening to her speak for several minutes. And it makes you want to take more action to take ownership for your own life too. Every episode is full of great content and action steps you can take to really take this responsibility that she speaks to. Every minute of every episode is really worth your time, and it's such a great listen.
So let's talk a moment about courage, because I also think that courage is a very important ingredient when we're talking about resiliency. Courage is the willingness to get uncomfortable, to fail, to not do things perfectly, to ask for help when you need it. And it's interesting with action, right? We always talk, like a lot of, personal development spaces and places will talk about the fact that action is where the magic happens, right? We have to take action. And I believe that taking action requires a lot of courage, especially when we talk about massive action. So massive action is when you're actually risking failure, okay? You're actually doing something that you could fail at, versus passive action, which is very safe. It's very comfortable action. So I'll give you some examples. Passive action, the very safe kind of action, is like purchasing a course or listening to a podcast or reading a book or doing research online or trying to design your business cards. That's all passive action, right? You're not really going to fail in those endeavors. But massive action is when you actually start taking action that moves your life in a direction. And I say a direction because it's either going to move you closer to what you want or further away from it. So massive action looks like actually practicing the skill that you learned on the podcast or read about in the book. It looks like making that phone call to that person that you are a little intimidated to communicate with. Massive action looks like putting yourself out there in a Facebook Live so people can get to know your message versus just designing your website or business cards. Right? There's a very big difference. Massive action is showing up at the gym to do a workout you've never done before versus just researching the types of classes you could take. That's the difference. Massive action that actually moves your life, requires courage. It requires courage to step in the arena with new behaviors and get to know yourself. And I say get to know yourself because when you're practicing new things, you're going to feel really uncomfortable. You're going to probably screw up a lot. And you're definitely going to get a little stressed out or a lot stressed out. And you get to learn how you deal with all of those things, which is awesome. Because when you learn about yourself in that way, and if you identify that you're not actually coping with those things in a way that you like or that is useful to you, you get to change it. It takes courage to admit your gaps and your weaknesses and where you could use help. And that's why I think courage is such a big part of resiliency. I had to ask for so much help to get this podcast to where it is today. I had to admit a lot of weaknesses. I feel like I had to admit just about every weakness because there was so much I didn't know. There was so much I was nervous about. There was so much self-doubt when I actually spent hours producing a podcast episode. And then I started questioning it. Was it useful? Do I need to redo it? Right? And so left and right, I was admitting weaknesses to people who knew more than I did. So I could just really stay straight with myself and not cause myself to unnecessarily suffer, or worse yet, not deliver. Because how much would it suck to put all this time and energy into a project like this and then never ship it out into the world because I was riddled with so much self-doubt? And this is why I'm such a fan of coaching, my friends, because I have had coaches for almost 20 years for this very reason. Just like you, I need to be talked down, right? And reminded of my power, and that the things that I'm making such a big deal out of in reality just aren't that big of a deal, and that I have a choice in how I think about things. I do the work that I do in the world because other people have helped me to overcome those exact same obstacles. So I believe in coaching 150%. Coaching helps you to be courageous. It reminds you of your own resiliency.
My listening to Courtney's podcasts over the years has really helped me to stay on track, be consistent, and address different areas of health than just diet and exercise, but helped me to be more mindful and aware of many other topics. I really have enjoyed the way that she brings in different speakers and interviews them so that we can become more informed on more topics. It has been a great addition to my life and my health and care routine.
Okay, let's talk about consistency. You guys have all heard me talk about consistency before. If you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, I have an entire program called the Consistency Code. But the reason consistency is so important to resiliency is because consistency builds self-trust. And you will never feel resilient if you don't learn how to trust yourself. And learning how to trust yourself means that you show up for yourself on a regular basis. You show up to do things like manage your thoughts and emotions and manage your chemistry. You have a plan for how you're going to do those things. You start to predict obstacles and strategies around what you want to become more consistent with. All of those things help you to build trust with yourself. And I also think we build trust with ourselves by removing really disempowering statements from our vocabulary. Like, I can't do this. Or this is too hard. I'm not smart enough. I don't have it in me. I'm never going to fill in the blank. I'm too overwhelmed. I'm confused. I don't know. These are all phrases that a lot of women use a lot. And when we use statements like that, what's crazy is our brain will seek evidence for us about why those statements are true. Language is so powerful. And your thoughts will always find evidence for themselves. So it may seem like a small thing to say, oh, I just don't know. I just don't know. I don't know. I don't know. How often do you hear women say that? I think in one conversation with a client the other day, I heard her say, I don't know, about 20 times in the first 20 minutes of talking to her. And when you tell yourself you don't know, you will validate that you don't know. What if you had to know? I bet you could find an answer. I bet you could find the answer to just taking the next step. Right? When you tell yourself you can't, you're going to find evidence for all the reasons you can't. When you tell yourself you're not capable, you're not strong enough, you're not smart enough, whatever it is, you will find evidence for why that is true. And here's the thing. I have those moments still, all the time, where I will catch myself saying something in my head, like, Courtney, you're not smart enough, right? Like, this is always going to be a problem for you. Or I'll play the compare and despair game, right? Comparing my podcast to somebody else's or someone else's success to my success, which really just makes me feel unsuccessful. But what's different now for me is that I catch myself doing it. And I recognize that when I do that, I'm making things so much harder. It's not helping me to problem solve. It's actually creating more of a problem. So why the hell would I keep doing it? A lot of you hear me talk about this and you think that, oh, well, I'm going to get to a place where I just never talk to myself like that again. Not going to happen. You're probably going to talk to yourself in that way, in some way, for the rest of your life, on occasion at least. But when you catch yourself doing it, and this is why awareness is so important, what are you going to do about it? Because awareness presents you with an opportunity to make a different choice. I want to seek evidence for why I can. I want to seek evidence for all the reasons I am smart enough and I can be successful. And this is possible for me. So how do I need to flip the script in my head to make that my focus? That's our work. And that takes consistency, right? I have to build a lot of practices to learn how to better manage my thoughts and emotions to be able to manage myself in that way. So consistency helps to build self-trust, and self-trust is really the backbone to resiliency. No matter what happens, you know you're going to be okay.
The Grace and Grit podcast has been such an amazing lifesaver for me. They're practical Courtney interviews, amazing leaders in the health field, and she's all about overall health and not just weight loss. And I love listening to her practical approach to getting healthy. And my favorite part is how it's not always about eating less and moving more to get healthy. Sometimes it's actually about resting and taking care of yourself mentally. And I love that about her. She does not buy into the whole diet culture. And it's just very lifelong practices.
Let's talk about the final pillar, the final ingredient to resiliency. And I shouldn't even say it's the final ingredient. It's just one of the primary ones I wanted to talk about today, which is confidence. So confidence, I think, is very closely related to that self-trust element. Confidence is trusting yourself to show up, not on occasion, not just for a few days or a few weeks, but consistently, on the regular. Confidence is trusting yourself to figure it all out, figure it out, right? So whatever it is that's on your heart that you want to create in your life, and whatever story you're telling yourself for all the reasons why you can't do that, I just want to challenge you today for looking for the reasons why you can. You do know enough right now to make the next right step, even if that's just a phone call. Even if it's just asking a question. You know what the next right step is, and that's all you need to know. And trust that when you take that step, the next one will reveal itself. Confidence is trusting yourself to maintain a strong opinion of who you are, regardless of how much you screw up, regardless of how many mistakes you make. I spoke to this at the very beginning of the podcast today. If I used all of my mistakes to prove to myself that I was incapable, that there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't cut out for podcasting, you would not be listening to this episode today. That's for sure. I screwed up a lot. I made a ton of mistakes. I got very embarrassed at times. And I never used that against myself. And that is, I think, one of the big reasons we are here today having this episode. I used it to learn about myself, about my strategies, and I didn't let my mistakes or my failures ever define me. And I think that has a lot to do with self-respect. And I have done many, many episodes on self-respect if you want more on that. But confidence is also rooted in trusting your ability to get up and take another step after you have failed, right? In fact, that's where we grow our strength, is by getting up again and again and again. It's a lot of reps, right? And that's where resiliency is born. Confidence is also trusting that your opinion of yourself is really, at the end of the day, what matters most. And I always summarize that to my students by saying, the thing that matters most is that you can put your head on the pillow at the end of the day and be at peace with how you showed up. That's what confidence is. So I'm hugely passionate about confidence. I have done several podcasts on it. I've done workshops on it. And now I'm really excited to tell you we are actually running a summit all about confidence. It's called Confident Women Rising. It is a free online conference, or I shouldn't say conference, it's a free online summit that begins on April 20th and runs through April 24th. And you can go to confidentwomenrising.com to find out more details about it and to get yourself registered. It is going to be amazing. I have 16 incredible thought leaders coming to this summit to share with you how to become more confident in the areas of health. And that spans a lot of topics, by the way. Yes, we talk about exercise and we talk about nutrition, but we also talk a lot about mindset and money and failure and challenge and hormones, all the things. So I cannot emphasize to you enough to get yourself registered for this event. Once again, all you need to do is go to confidentwomenrising.com to get yourself registered. So let me just kind of in closing say this about confidence. A lot of you've heard me mention Carol Dweck's book, Mindset. Such a good read. I cannot recommend it highly enough. But Carol Dweck says in that book that true self-confidence is the courage to be open, to welcome change and new ideas regardless of their source. Real self-confidence is not reflected in a title, an expensive suit, a fancy car, or a series of acquisitions. It is reflected in your mindset, your readiness to grow. So once again, I just want to remind you of those 4 elements, those 4 practices, because that's what they are, really. They're practices that you can lean into to develop more resiliency. And those are commitment, courage, consistency, and confidence. And I really want you to remember that resiliency can be learned. It is not something that you're born with or without. It is something that you can decide to develop more of at any time. And we are being presented with a very big opportunity right now to develop more resiliency. And think about this too. A lot of people define resiliency as bouncing back to who you used to be before or what life was before. And I think resiliency is bigger than that. I think resiliency actually expands you into version 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 of yourself. I will tell you that after 200 episodes of this podcast, I don't ever want to go back to who I was before I had a podcast. I'm not that version of Courtney Townley. I'm version 2.0. And this version of me is so much stronger, so much more clear, so much more aware of herself. I would never want to go back. So I want you just to kind of think about that when you kind of conceptualize resiliency, that it's actually the next version of you. That's what it enables you to step into. That's what resiliency provides you with, is that next version of yourself. Because when you do hard things, when you are willing to lean into hard things, it will reveal parts of yourself that you would have never been aware of had that not happened, had you not done those things. So that is it, my friends. That's all I have for you today. I know it was a lot. This episode was longer than most, but I also just felt like it was such an important conversation. Obviously, there's probably 20,000 other conversations I could have just out of this one. But I do hope that something in there was helpful to you in making these difficult and very uncertain times maybe just a little bit more gentle. And also, again, just reminding yourself that an opportunity is being presented to you for developing more resiliency. So how do you want to show up within this? And what might you need to start doing? And what might you need to stop doing in order to show up in that way? I think it's a really good question to ask. So once again, do not forget to register for the Confident Women Rising Summit. It's going to be so good. Again, you can go to confidentwomenrising.com. If you cannot remember that, I'm going to post it on the page of the website where this episode is found. And of course, if you follow me anywhere on social media, you will see me posting about it everywhere. So I hope you'll join me. It's going to be great. All right, my friends, have a wonderful day, and I will see you again very soon.
Thank you, Courtney, for being an inspiration and for speaking truth in a way where I can receive it and then work towards being the best version of me.
Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story. And it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort. And with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.